Alrighty, so today we have another book review for you. This is Anthem by Miss Ayn Rand. She is a Soviet novelist. She was born in the Soviet Union. She later moved to America, but we'll get into that in a minute. Just a little expose before we begin the episode. This is another book review. We know we've had a few in the past few weeks, but schedule is just really conflicting right now around the holidays.
Right.
But we have some really exciting interviews coming up in the next few weeks that we hope you'll stick around and listen to.
Yeah.
So today, like I mentioned before, we are reading an Ayn Rand book, and this book is Anthem.
Is it Ayn Rand or Ayn Rand?
And I'm not really sure.
I've heard it as Ayn, but...
I think it'd probably be pronounced both ways, and we've heard it both ways.
And, it's Soviet too, so we don't really know.
But yeah, this is one of 4 novels written by Miss Rand. It's Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, We the Living, and Anthem. And Anthem is the shortest of the
By
bunch.
far.
By far the shortest. This is basically a novella.
Right.
It's between 85 and 105 pages based on which editions you have and if you read the introduction or forward and such. But still, it's a very short novel. And
for reference, I got it in 2 hours.
Yeah, but don't let that dissuade you from reading this book. It's great, and she packs a ton into it.
Yeah.
To go into a little bit of backstory about Miss Ayn Rand, she was born, I think it's 5 in the Soviet Union. And at this time, the Soviets were not
doing too hot.
Bolshevik. It was Tsarist Russia. And then 1917 happens, and the Bolshevik Revolution takes place.
Yeah.
And
she was not a supporter, by the way.
She was ardently against communism, and growing up as a young adult in communist Soviet Union, that's not a really good place for you to be.
No. So
she moved to the United States,
right,
claiming to go be visiting family members, and she just never left. So she defected, really.
Yeah.
And she started writing. She started a writing career here.
Yeah, she actually started out as kind of like a playwright for movies in Hollywood. She had a little bit of success there, but she did that for a long time. But what she's known for nowadays are her books.
Yeah, and she's a pretty controversial author, too.
Yes,
today.
she is.
In many literary circles, I'm not really sure exactly the reasoning and story behind that, but you do see a lot of reservations.
Yeah, I think it has more to do with her books like Fountainhead. From what I understand, Fountainhead is an anti-religious book, and obviously that's a sensitive topic in some areas, and that can put people off to her a little bit. And we're not here to comment about that, but we are reading this book, and I would describe this book as an anti-communist book, or an specifically collectivism book. She cites collectivism as the topic she was writing against in this book, I guess, for lack of a better term.
And this book is extremely philosophical, as we'll get to here in a minute. She actually created her own system of philosophical thought.
Yes, she did. It's
objectivism, yes.
Yeah, it's called objectivism. And she was an ardent opposer of collectivism, which has many parallels to communism. So that's why people say it's an anti-communist book, and it's close enough that it really is.
Well, based on her backstory, you can really
understand why.
Even if it's not solid, you can understand why. And one of her other books, We the Living, actually deals with communism in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
But the book starts out where it's a dystopian novel. I've never really been that into dystopian works. Ethan has.
Yeah, they're awesome. Especially the short and concise ones, they pack a punch, right? Fahrenheit is a good example of that.
And I like Fahrenheit, but
it's not your thing, right?
It's not really my thing.
Right, and that's okay.
Going into it, the first few pages, 5 or 10 pages, I was like, okay, it was good, but I wasn't really. It's like I didn't know really what I was getting.
Yeah.
By the end of the novel, I was absolutely hooked, and I thought it was probably one of the best reads I've read this year.
Oh yes, for sure. And for reference, I wasn't really that familiar with this book. I knew who Ayn Rand was, but I wasn't familiar with Anthem. And I saw one of my friends was reading it. I was like, oh, what's this book? Because I like to ask people what they're reading, because sometimes it's interesting. I might like it. And they said, oh, it's about the society where they don't use the word I, the pronoun I. They say we. When they want to refer to themselves, they say we. And it's more about a collective brotherhood and a collective state of thought.
The story takes place in the future.
Yes.
We don't really know what happened in the past. We assume it's some type of war or societal collapse.
It's referred to as the unspeakable times.
Yeah.
Ominous.
And basically everybody in the world has agreed to give up their individual self, individuality, and only live for other people.
I think agreed is a bit of a misattribution because, or an inaccuracy, because as the new generations are born, they're never really even taught about the individual self. It doesn't exist. They only exist within the larger system. They are never given an option to be an individual. They're always told that you fit into the system, you are the system, you are happy because you're in the system. You can't be sad because you're in the system and the system makes you happy.
Yeah.
Right?
And they use the pronouns we for themselves.
Yes.
It's always us. And at the beginning, when you're first reading it, our main character is equality.
225,
225. They have given names with numbers that
Right.
are not individualistic whatsoever.
No, they're literally just numbers on a page.
No, and so like when they're born, they don't know their parents.
Nope.
They grow up with 100 other people in a room. They live with them, they learn, and then from ages 5 to 15, they go to school.
Yep.
They all learn the same thing, and at age 15, that special counsel comes in and gives them their job.
Yeah, just so for a bit of background information, the special counsel, it's kind of like a representative democracy in a way, but it's not democratic. There are smaller councils within bigger councils. So we have a counselor for maybe
scholars.
Yeah, well, not even that, but we have a counselor for what would be a county, right? And then maybe a state, then a country, and then the word, and there's the word council. And there's, of course, thousands, if not maybe millions of them across the world.
We don't really know.
Yeah, it doesn't really say.
It could just be a few. It could be the whole world. We're not really sure.
Yeah. It does mention later in the book, and I'll try not to talk about this yet because it's a spoiler, but how it took a long time to get all the councils to agree on something. So that kind of gives you...
Yeah, and
since it's
one of the reasons why I think that it's not that widespread is, this is set in the future, but everything technologically advanced has collapsed.
Yes.
So if it's all over the world,
I feel like there'd be remnants of that.
There'd be remnants of that, but also, how is there a world council that just visits this small town?
Right.
If it's all over the whole world, that's why I don't think it's really that large.
That's true.
But basically, society has devolved and retrograded into the far past. They've just had the invention of candles.
Yeah.
And that's a real big...
Within the last 100 years.
Yeah. It's a real big advancement to them.
Yeah, woohoo, candles.
They wear white togas. They just figured out how to make glass again. And all the old books and everything else has been destroyed by them.
Yeah.
Because they see it as evil and greedy. So they only want to live for their brothers. And everybody's miserable.
Yeah.
At age 15, they get assigned to a position.
Yeah.
And they will work in that position until they're 40.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they're skillful in other things. They're just assigned, like our main character, he was very smart, but he was assigned street sweeper.
Yeah. That's not very fulfilling for him.
No, it's not very fulfilling at all. And at age 40, they work
to
every day. And at age 40, they go to the home of the useless.
Yeah.
And they basically just die from there.
Yeah, and it says that they only live for about 5 years after, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And can you imagine working for 25 years and then having a 5-year retirement?
Every single facet of this world is about control. Everything is in line all the time.
Everything and everyone is controlled by the councils.
Yeah, and our main character, Equality, he was very smart. They knew he was smart. And he wanted to be a scholar. He wanted to figure out new things and to advance the society. For his brothers, he said. He got made street sweeper. I think this was done on purpose.
Yes. It said in the book that he always asked questions, and he always understood things too quickly.
And he wished he didn't have that ability.
Yes, he says he stood out. And he also knew that he was very tall, and that was abnormal. People were not as tall as him, and that made him stand out. And that combined with his intelligence and him asking questions, it made him a target. And I agree with Luke. I think he was probably singled out by the councils and made a street sweeper in order to try to stop him and hinder him.
Most other people in this world, they're not happy, but they seem to have just gone along with it.
Yeah.
The street sweepers in general seem to be all around much more a collection of free thinkers.
Yeah.
Because we have 2 other street sweepers in the story.
And granted, we don't get a lot of exposure to other occupations.
No, we don't, but we can kind of...
We can kind of assume of some sorts. Because we'll see they have these meetings, and they talk about how they're not allowed to even talk to the other occupations except for during these meetings, and no one really says anything of substance in the meetings.
No.
You would think maybe they're free thinkers.
Yeah, but like International, another character, he's a street sweeper.
Yes.
He doesn't get involved in Equality's plan later on, but he doesn't
report him. He doesn't turn him in. He supports it in a small way.
So basically, Equality's very smart. He becomes a street sweeper. And he does this for 2 or 3 years, and he's very unhappy.
Yeah.
He realizes that there's more to life than what is presented to him. And basically, this society, though it's all about control, they tried to make a utopia. They wanted everybody to be happy and equal.
Yeah.
And most of the time when that happens, the exact opposite
They
takes
create
place.
a dystopia.
A dystopia, which, for those of you who do not know, that's how the word derives from utopia. It's a dystopia. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that until this week. So
interesting.
So yes, it's a dystopia. So nobody's really happy. He's just going about his day, and all of a sudden he comes across this grate.
Yeah, it's like I almost think of it as like a manhole, and it has a tunnel in it. And
have you thought about what the tunnel was there for? I thought it may be like a subway tunnel.
Yeah, or I was thinking more along the lines of those barrier cables that form miles and miles of tunnels underground, maybe like in France. But I was imagining a similar tunnel to that. Just underground tunnels, maybe like a subway. I think that might be a better representation of it. But yeah, like Luke had said, we find this grate or manhole. It doesn't really say, it's not super important. But they find it, and no one had ever discovered it before. And Equality and International, our other character, they're kind of puzzled by it. They're like, should we go down in it? Is it a sin? Is it evil? Because they refer to their transgressions as either transgressions, sins, or evils. And they can't really decide. And Equality says that the council has not made a law that prohibits you from entering into the tunnel.
Yeah, but Equality, and then International says, well, they haven't made a law saying you can either.
Right.
I thought that was
really indicative of their thought process, right? They can't even, they're not allowed to look at a manhole because the council didn't allow it. Everything is regimented and legalized so much that they're not able to think for themselves. That was just amazing. Hands off to Rand for that sentence right there. For me, really sets the tone of the rest of the book.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, wow, when I read that.
Exactly. Me too. Exactly. That's exactly what I thought, because it made you think.
Yeah.
It's like, because you can see how, and it's also separate from the story. You can see how many different ways there are to look at situations.
Right.
You can totally flip things.
Yes.
And it could be with anything.
Yeah.
Really. So I thought that was very intelligent on her part.
Oh yes, this book is full of things like that.
Yeah.
But anyways, Equality ends up deciding that he's going to go. He's going to go down the tunnel. So he goes down. He doesn't go down very far. He kind of looks around and he comes back up. And International tells him that his face is white. It turns out that Equality's just smiling, right? He's happy. And he ends up going home that night, and someone sees him, I guess an authority figure, and says...
Not that night. Because this night he finally knows what he has right here. This is the beginning of his almost liberation of his mind almost. So he goes back to his, not really home, but barracks that night.
Dwelling.
And that's the night he finally realizes how unhappy everybody is. Because he's finally had this happy thought, and he's lying there in bed, and nobody's talking to each other, and people are like crying out in their sleep.
Correct. Yeah.
I forget, is it Unanimity? 4411? I think so. Anyway, he's going through this emotional breakdown. He doesn't know what's happening to him.
There are characters who are breaking down in in their sleep. They're crying out in agony and pain, but no one knows why. They say the doctors cannot figure out what's wrong with him, but he's just unhappy.
Chronically
Luke's right. I was thinking of a different night.
Well, it's right after this.
Right, it is.
So he finally realizes what it's like to discover something for himself.
Yes. What
it's like to be happy, and nobody else understand why he's happy. Everything's always, we've mentioned control 1,000 times in this book, but everything's unanimous.
Right.
You're taught not to think anything different from your brothers, not to think. It almost reminds me of Plato's Republic in a way, kind of that utopian society. You know, it takes a village to raise a child. This is taken to an extreme sense.
Also, something we forgot to mention earlier, it'll be important in a few minutes. Men and women are separated out. They do not live together. In fact, they're not even allowed to see each other.
No, the women are referred to as peasants, and they live outside of the city.
Yes, they're not allowed to see each other except for one time during the year, and that's the time of the mating. And
very strange.
Yes, and they mate so that the women can have babies, and then they never see each other again. And equality, he hates this. He says, we find this disgusting and humiliating. He says we because he's not at that point where he's an individual yet. He's still part of the collective. Yeah. And he says we. And also something else, whenever he refers to one of his companions, maybe international, maybe a character that comes in the future, he always says they, not he. They say they are. Or so instead of international is funny, which they wouldn't use the word funny, they would say they are funny, not he is funny. It's very interesting, and I was thinking about more of the linguistic sides of this. They had the concept of a singular and a plural because they can identify, oh, it is a book. They can identify that is a singular book. So not everything is in plurals. Whoever has designed this curriculum has really honed it so that humans are not individuals. Humans are not singular. Humans are plural. It's collective. It's collectivism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not even capable of thinking of humans as anything but plural.
No. And when he speaks of we, you get used to it really fast. But sometimes when he's with, for example, international, and they're like going into the tunnel, it's hard to distinguish whether they both went in or whether it was just him. And he was the only one that went into the tunnel. Right. But at first reading it, I'm like, is international in the tunnel with him? Right.
And later on in the book, he does start saying we, comma, equality, comma, which is like clearly designating that it's just him. And I thought that was interesting. He was developing more. It was very indirect and it was very slight, but Rand was having the character to develop more of a sense of individualization.
Yeah, and here's the specific. His name was Fraternity 25503. He says, yet our brothers are not like us. All is not well with our brothers. There are Fraternity 25503, a quiet boy with wise, kind eyes, who cries suddenly, without reason, in the midst of day or night, and their body shakes with sobs they cannot explain. So they're suffering almost. They're in bondage, and this society that was created to bring them all together is not working out the way they thought. Right. So basically, equality goes back to the tunnel. For a good while. I mean, for months, I think for a few months, he goes back to the tunnel. Right. This story skips around into the future. So this happens scenes happen right after.
It's not linear whatsoever.
No, but he keeps on going back to the tunnel for a few months, and he starts working on projects. Yeah.
He starts
electrical components.
Eventually, yes. Yeah. He mentions that he starts doing chemistry and mixing chemicals, and I thought that was kind of neat.
Frogs.
Yeah. And that's how he discovers electricity. So, from how I understood it, he first learns to mix chemicals and basically do chemistry. And then, like Luke mentioned, he starts experimenting with frogs. And you notice that when he
animating them.
Yeah, basically. When he would cut a dead frog's limb, it would twitch. And he says, "There's this force that I don't know about. What is it?" And it turns out that he was actually just conducting electricity in between his scalpel and his whatever's holding the frog down. So when he was cutting into it, electricity would flow from his knife to the anchors, and it would make the muscles in the frog move. Yeah. And through more experimentation, he discovered that, wow, this was electricity, and it has the power. It's the power of the sky, which is just lightning, right? Yeah. It has the power to do things, and this was revolutionary for him.
And he even figures out how to light up copper wires.
Right. He makes light bulbs.
Yeah.
Right?
So he doesn't understand that the reason why they're not advanced is because there are higher people up, I think in the World Council.
Yeah. Preventing them.
People are preventing them. They know what's going on. Yeah. And they're maliciously controlling them. Right. And they know that for their own self-gain and benefit. So he doesn't understand how much foul play is going on here when it comes to his freedom.
Yeah. And when he discovers this, he is over the moon.
Yeah.
He says it's going to help his brothers.
Yeah. And he says for the first time in his life, he fears losing something.
Yeah. He fears losing the opportunity to share this wonderful discovery with his brothers, and he's happy.
So, he stops. He becomes very strict about what he does.
Yes.
And one evening, he figures out the World Council, the highest council in this land, is coming to visit the city.
Right.
To kind of like a general meeting, like a State of the Union almost, kind of like a yearly thing.
Yeah.
And he realizes they're coming.
And he decides to go.
It's not the World Council, I'm sorry. It's the Council of Scholars. It's the World Council of Scholars that's coming to meet him.
Right.
So he decides that if anybody can fully appreciate what I've discovered, it's going to be these people.
Right. But before we explain that, we're leaving out a very important part.
So he's at the theater one night, and he leaves, because this is how he's able to go to the tunnel every night, because he leaves during the theater because nobody's paying attention.
Right.
And he always has it he has a little sundial.
Yeah, hourglass.
Hourglass, and he figures out, once the sundial's about to run out, he goes back to the theater, and nobody knows where he went to.
Yes.
One night he gets distracted, and
doesn't notice that the sand's running out.
No, and he runs back home, back to the barracks in the middle of the night, and everybody wants to know where he went to.
Yeah. The guardsman or authority figure arrests him, basically. So, all that's a quick overview of what happens. But there's one segment that we kind of forgot to mention, and it's very important. Actually, the most vital parts of the story. Our character, Equality, meets a girl.
Yeah.
He meets a girl. And it's like, wait, I thought the characters weren't allowed to intermingle between the sexes. And they're not. But what happens is, since Equality is a street sweeper, he's given an area to sweep. Or clean, I guess. And it turns out that a portion of his route, and it's the same route every single day for all 25 years that he works, which is just mind-numbing to me. It turns out on this route that he can see farms where females work. Mm-hmm. So eventually, one day, he makes contact with a female. Her name ends up being Liberty. And here's another interesting note. All the characters' names have either feminine or masculine connotations. Fraternity is a very masculine connotation. Equality, I think, doesn't really have a connotation, but Liberty does. Like Liberty, you think Lady Liberty, right?
Such a Liberty, yeah.
Yeah, Lady Liberty. It's feminine. International, maybe you think like an international businessman or whatever, right? Maybe it's masculine. And these things don't necessarily have to be masculine or feminine, but there's an intent behind it that Rand has, right? So, I just thought that was neat.
Yeah.
But our character Equality and our other character, Liberty, they kind of hit it off, right?
They both recognize that there's something different about each other.
Right. Just like Equality had recognized there's something different with International.
Yeah. So she offers him water.
Right.
And he drinks it out of her hand. And it's kind of an awkward scene.
Yeah.
Because you can tell there's a lot of affection there, but it's a really strange way to show it.
Yeah. But to be fair, they've never had
that. And I'm a sucker for stuff like that. I really am. So this part of the story was pretty neat for me. I don't know. I just enjoy that type of stuff.
Luke's an old romantic.
At heart, I guess I am. But I really enjoyed that part of the story. It was very strange.
It was.
And he said for all of it, he said he met her and he couldn't stop thinking about her.
Right. And this is what I was going to get at earlier. When he went home after he had met her and kissed her, one of his authority figures asked why he was so happy. Why he was smiling. Yeah. And Equality said, because I'm happy. And the guard said, well, of course you're happy. You're in the Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Like, how couldn't you be happy?
Yeah, you're always happy.
Right. That was just another. And that point right there was another, like, wow, drop book on the floor moment.
And, he mentions earlier about the mating process. He meets her and he can't stop thinking about her.
Right.
And he starts meeting her more and more often.
Right.
And then he said all of a sudden he's almost, if anybody's been in love like that, there's a lot of jealousy involved, even if it's harmless.
Yeah.
Even if it's harmless, that's just part of it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden he feels intense jealousy of the mating process.
Yes.
Because he's afraid that somebody else will
mate with her.
And to him that's just unacceptable. I mean, to anybody would be, but and that he doesn't really understand that concept really.
Right.
So he's confused by it. But he thinks about her often until he gets caught with escaping out to the tunnel.
Right.
He doesn't tell anybody he's escaping to the tunnel.
Right.
They just don't know where he went. He refuses to tell them where he was that night. He gets thrown in jail.
And he's lashed.
He's lashed. He's beaten.
Beaten horribly.
Another interesting thing, they didn't really have locks on the doors.
No, they didn't.
Or guards. So he just walked right out after 3 days.
Because it was not permitted by the council to break out of jail. And like, once again, there's another level to the mind-boggliness, for lack of a better word. They just have so much control over the citizens. It's crazy.
And everybody seems really dumbed down too.
Yeah, and an important part of the story is, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but what Ayn Rand wanted to demonstrate with the book is that this sense of individualism and freedom is inherent within every human.
Mm-hmm.
It's nature, it's not nurture. And when you try to beat it out with nurture, it's unsuccessful because the nature will still come out. And I think that's really demonstrated with the interactions between equality and liberty, because they were not taught, there was no nurture for them to love each other, but they did anyway. That's nature.
That's nature, and love can be nature too.
Yeah, and the jealousy especially.
That's
nature.
Anybody who's been in a relationship has experienced jealousy.
Yeah.
Even if it's unfounded.
Yeah.
Because there is that base biological
desire.
What's mine is mine, and people want to protect that.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times that harkens back to ancestors, and it's very animalistic in a sense.
It is.
So he's experiencing this, and like Ethan said, the whole book is about its forced connection.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's equal. Between liberty and equality, which he names her the golden one in his mind.
Yes.
Between him and the golden one, it's connection that's not forced. It's connection that was forged in a natural way. Mm-hmm. So that kind of breaks all the molds that was set previously for him, and he is dumbfounded by it.
Right.
But he loves her, really, in as much of a sense as he can at this point. But he realizes that he has a bigger calling, really.
Yeah.
The Council of Scholars is coming in that next day that he escapes. He realizes he has to leave jail.
Yeah.
And he goes back to the tunnel and hides out with this little light contraption he's made. And basically he's going to prove to the council that he can create light.
Right.
That they don't have to make candles anymore.
Right.
What he doesn't realize is they're specifically making candles to keep people busy. Mm-hmm. So he goes into the council and they're horrified by it.
And if anyone's ever read 1984, this should be setting off alarms in your head. It's very similar. Mm-hmm. All these books are similar. 1984, Anthem, Fahrenheit 451, they're all so similar. And you don't really realize how scary it is until you read dystopian novels where the authors have absolutely no relation to each other and they're similar. They're all scared of the same thing.
I think Ayn Rand has experienced this
almost
more than anybody.
She lived it. Right.
So when you're reading parts of this story, you're constantly thinking about real life scenarios and situations that correlate. This isn't a true story, obviously, but there is correlations to the real world. And if you're a student of history, you can really see that.
Right. But like Luke had mentioned, our character, Equality, had walked into this council meeting, right? Yeah. And they were like, "What are you doing?" No one has ever walked in without being invited. Yeah. And they were just dumbfounded. And he says, "Brothers, it's okay. I have an invention that will change the world. Yeah. It will save everyone." Like, he's excited.
And then he lights it up.
Yeah.
And they freak out.
Yeah. But some characters like jump back and hide behind each other. They're horrified by this. And Equality's like, "What? What's wrong? Like, this is just light." And everyone's like, "No, it's not allowed. You're a street sweeper. You're a lowly street sweeper." Mm-hmm. And they use some term, I forgot what it was, but it was very derogatory. And it was like, it implied that there was a hierarchy, like a status to the jobs. And it was like, you shouldn't, it's not your job to think. Why are you thinking, right?
No, and at this point, he feels more angry than he has ever felt before. Because he says, "I've given you this great gift, and you're rejecting it.
Right.
So eventually he gets so mad, he runs basically through the window.
Yeah.
Which I laughed when I read it, because I think it's funny. Yeah. So we failed to mention this previously. One of the ways that they control this population of the city is the forest.
Mm-hmm.
People's ran away, and they say they've been eaten by these monsters or something. We don't really know that. They could have lived a happy life.
Yeah.
But that's how they control these people, by telling them that there's beasts and animals in this forest that will eat them and they'll never survive.
And there's probably some truth to that. But
Probably, but it's not like...
It's not like, oh, you step in and you die.
No. But that's how they put us. Nobody went into the forest, and that's really... The forest surrounds this town.
Yeah.
So nobody ever leaves. Ever, really.
And equality's running away, and he has the bright idea, oh, well, I can't stay in the city because they'll just find me and they'll kill me. And the council did mention that they were going to rearrest him. They were going to cut his tongue out and beat him until he died. Yeah. They weren't just going to execute him regularly.
They were also even going to send him to the World Council to see what they thought.
Right. They were serious. And
they said no crime like this have ever been committed.
Right. And the guard is like, what? No, I don't want to die, obviously. So back again to that nature, right? Mm-hmm. He has a sense of self-worth. So he runs out to the woods, and he ends up hiding for a few days, just sleeps on the ground. He's protecting, at the same time, his light, right? And eventually he builds up campfires. He learns how to kill things, cook them. So he's still learning, right? Learning is very crucial for our character. And he ends up making a circle of campfires so that animals don't attack him at night. And I just think that was neat.
Yeah.
And eventually, liberty.
Before this, he goes to the creek. And it's the icy creek, and he sees his reflection. He finally figures out what he looks like. And he says immediately he trusted that person.
Yeah. And
it's a very strange thing to read because it's you.
Yeah.
He says he trusts that person, and he says it's beautiful.
Yeah.
He has blonde hair, blue eyes.
He's strong.
Well-defined. And what we did mention earlier is there's a word you can't speak. Nobody knows what it is. It's I.
Yeah.
It's I.
It's the unspeakable word.
If you can deduce that from reading it, but it's I, the word. And if somebody says it, they're immediately killed.
Right.
There's another character.
They cut your tongue out too, so you can't say it.
There's another character before this. Remember, they don't know their parents. He was blonde hair and blue eyed, and he used that word, and he was killed.
Right.
And he looked specifically at equality as he was being killed. My theory is that was his father.
Maybe sibling father, yeah.
Sibling or father, because nobody else looks like him. That guy looked like him,
right.
And he had that same fiery spirit that equality had.
And this could be why he was assigned to be a street sweeper, because they wanted to extinguish him.
Yeah. So I thought that has to be in some way connected to him.
That's a good connection.
I didn't
think about that.
She doesn't expressly say that, but you can kind of connect the dots somewhere.
Yeah.
But anyways, he sees his reflection for the first time. And it's this powerful experience for him, really.
Yes.
And it almost reminds me going back tonight.
Right.
When Ellie sees his reflection in the mirror.
At the hospital.
When he has it. Not the hospital. When he's going to the SS officers.
Okay.
Because remember, he goes and takes a shower once they're liberated.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't seen his reflection in years.
Right.
Kind of same thing here. And that was a really powerful moment. But like Ethan says, yeah, liberty comes back.
Liberty comes, yeah. And they're like, Equality asks, why did you come, right? And Liberty says she didn't want to be without him. She risked her life so that she could be with him.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, right?
It's very touching.
Yeah.
And then it's a pretty weird scene.
Yeah.
They have relations, but none of them really know what's going on.
Yeah, they kiss each other, and Equality's reflecting back on it later, and he says, this is what happiness is. It's having the ability to hold a woman in your arms. And that's kind of sweet, right?
It is sweet, and if I could find it, I would read it, because it was sweet, but it was also kind of funny, too.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And Rand kind of reverts back to what I was saying, like, that nature can't be beaten out of you. Our character says that not even all the oppression can stop this feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if Luke can find it, we'll read it out. But our characters they've met up in the forest, they've kissed, they're in love, right? They
Absolutely.
end up building up a cabin or house type thing, and they just live there for what I assume to be maybe a few months or years.
Mm-hmm. Here it is. It says, "And that night we knew that to hold the body of woman in our arms is neither ugly nor shameful, but the one ecstasy granted to the race of men."
Right.
That's a great paragraph.
That is a great paragraph.
Most people, a lot of people think it's morally correct. No. But it's a beautiful paragraph.
It is.
The way it's written, I said, that's great. So, I thought it was great. But
right. And I agree. It was just amazing. This is an amazing book. I'm really glad that I read it. But yeah, equality and liberty are in their cabin.
Mm-hmm.
They're vibing. But one day they decide to go explore. And they end up finding this mountain. And not even the mountain goats can climb it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they decide to climb it. And they do somehow.
It was dangerous. I mean, rocks were sliding all around them.
Right. And they find a house. And it's abandoned, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it's got windows. It's very beautiful. I imagine a beautiful A-frame house. It's all glass. And within it they find lots of things. Like rooms and pots and light bulbs. And this confuses equality at first. It's like, how are the light bulbs? Like, I invented them, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't dawn upon him until later that light bulbs were a thing before.
Yeah.
He just didn't realize. But they end up counting all the rooms, and they say, this house could only hold 12 people. Why would they build it?
It's only meant for 2.
Right, because they only find 2 beds.
Yeah.
And they're just shocked. It's like a whole house for 2 people.
Mm-hmm. And this house is...
It's
a modern house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those houses that have windows for walls.
Right.
It's a very modern house. And it's interesting to see him experience that from windows in his world were just created recently.
Yeah.
So this house is sweet. Has from floor to ceiling, there's bookcases everywhere.
Yeah.
And he spends
months I guess,
reading.
Yeah. And eventually he develops that sense of individualism, that I, right?
Absolutely. And he gives himself a name. From his reading, he gives himself the name Prometheus.
Yep.
The guy who supposedly brought fire from the gods to humans. And is it Greek or
Greek mythology?
In Greek mythology.
And then he names his, I don't want to say wife, but
basically,
yeah. At this point, a wife.
She's pregnant with this child at this point. So
yeah, he says that they're so close they deserve to call each other by names and not just equality number, liberty number, right?
Yeah.
He names her Gaia or Gia. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce it, but she was the mother of all the gods in Greek mythology, and that's a beautiful way. And at the end of the book, there's some philosophical asides, I guess, and then the last word in the entire book is ego.
Yeah. And here's one of these right here I found.
Yeah.
That's really good. He said, "I understood the blessed thing which I had called my curse. I understood why the best in me had been my sins and my transgressions, and why I had never felt guilt in my sins. I understood that centuries of chains and lashes will not kill the spirit of man,
Yes.
nor the sense of truth within him."
Yes, and this is what I was talking about earlier.
The novel basically is about the liberation of the human spirit.
Right.
And it makes you go back and think about, really, the ideals of our founding fathers, too. Freedom of liberal thought, freedom of expression. You realize truly how beautiful that is.
Right.
When you read books like this, and how much they truly mean to people. We take them for granted.
Yes, we do.
But, many people in history have not had that same opportunity we have.
Right.
And this expresses that beautifully.
And it's a happy ending, which is
happy.
Slightly rare.
There's more to come, really. He plans on he's not going to take. He names her, is it Gaia? Gaia?
Gaia, yeah. Like I said
Gaia,
earlier.
for the goddess of Mother Earth.
Yeah.
In Greek mythology. So he's going to leave her behind, but at the end of the story, he plans on taking off and going back to get more people.
Yeah, he wants to help people. He wants to help his former brotherhood, but in a different way. He wants to educate them and expose them to this free thinking that he has found.
Presumably, he becomes a liberator. We don't know what happens, but
bookends.
Bookends, but very philosophical.
Yeah.
It's one of those books that makes you
think.
Yeah. And also kind of pumps you up a little bit.
It does. And like I mentioned earlier, the last word in the book is ego. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that was the working title for the book when Rand was originally writing it. When she published it, though, working as in, that was what her original idea was. That was the title of the book as she was writing it. But when she published it, and she had a very similar pattern with her other books, she decided not to give it the title Ego because she felt that it was too in your face. It gave away the topic of the story too much. So she changed it to Anthem. And the Anthem is meant to represent the sound of music representing the human soul.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, right? And Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead also have similar themes. I haven't read those books, so I can't tell you what exactly, but there's a similar idea. So I just think that was really beautiful. And for those who don't know, in psychology, ego is your sense of individualism, your sense of self.
There's that
your desire.
There's ID,
superego.
I'd, unconscious ego, superego.
Yeah, and ego is just unconscious ego, like you said. But yeah, I just thought that was really neat, and it's a good book, right?
Absolutely, I love the book, and I can't speak highly enough of it.
Right.
It's interesting. I wish we could figure out what happened before and after.
Right.
That's it's a good book.
Yeah.
But she wasn't really concerned with that. She was concerned with what the philosophy she was trying to push. And,
getting her point across.
And she gets across beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Ethan both love this book, and me and Ethan agree on most things, but some things we disagree on, but this one we really did like.
Yeah, we do.
And I think everybody should read it. It's one of those books that make you want to read other books.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great. Kind of reinvigorates you if you need. It's very short. It's a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
And if you need something to kind of reinvigorate you,
it's an excellent
I don't think
option.
there's anything better.
No.
So, Ethan, what are you reading besides this right now?
I'm actually reading the Hunger Games books because I went and saw the new movie, and I was just absolutely amazed. It was wonderful. And I was like, you know what? I haven't read the books. Might as well
You
give
have
them
Battle
a
of Songs, Broken Snakes?
I haven't read it.
I have it at the house if you want it.
Okay, good to know. What are you reading, Luke?
I'm reading, funnily enough, A Christmas Carol
Oh, really?
by Charles Dickens. And it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I've never seen the movie either, so, you know, most people see the movie, they haven't read the book. Well,
I haven't did either.
No, so I thought it was seasonally appropriate.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it, so. That's it for us this week. Stay tuned in for more exciting episodes coming up with some pretty interesting people
For sure.
that most of you probably know.
Yep.
All righty. Thank you.